Greetings and welcome to Aspects of Aliyah. In our last broadcast, we looked at the history of Zionism and the history of Aliyah. In part one, we looked at the history of Zionism and how the Jewish people appropriated it and the early movements towards the move back to their covenanted, historic homeland. In today's section, we're going to speak basically, probably a term that I coined for convenience, Christian-sponsored Aliyah, which of course wouldn't have happened until 1948, on the 14th of May, when Israel, once again, after 2 millennia, became a nation. It had always been a great dream of the Jewish people to return to Eretz Israel, and as we mentioned in our last broadcast, there were movements towards the idea of a national homeland for the Jewish people. This was picked up really long before the state and long before the Balfour Declaration of 1918 and the San Remo Conference that followed by Anglican evangelicals in the 19th century. William Wilberforce, who I'm sure is a familiar name to most people, was the leader of the abolitionist movement. In other words, to release slaves from their captivity, particularly in the colonies as well. Along with that was Lord Shaftesbury, another well-known figure, a great humanitarian, and a man called Louis Way, who had a real vision for the Jewish people, and he started off what eventually would become the church's ministry amongst the Jews. Eventually the Anglican Church, Christ Church in Jerusalem, in the Old City, was in the gift, became in the gift of the Anglican Church, and there's some sterling work amongst the Jewish people with workshops, educational systems, hospitals, but unfortunately a lot of this work was in Tsarist Russia and its holdings, and from 1916 onwards, the revolution, that work sort of fell away. CMJ still exists today, Christ Church still exists today, and they work mostly as evangelists. CMJ have never really been involved in Aliyah, other than when Hesed was part of CMJ, that worked in a small way with Aliyah, but mostly with those who couldn't make Aliyah, the topic of which we'll probably come to later. So, several evangelicals had got this view, this vision, this hope for a return of the Jewish people back to their homeland. It wasn't really until Steve Lytle's book, Exodus 2, and I'm going to use the word advisedly, burst onto the scene in the early 1980s. Steve Lytle, I'm sure, is known, or his name is known to many of you. And Steve basically had this vision when he was in Germany, working with the full gospel businessmen, of the return of the Jewish people. And he had this wonderful vision of people returning, and he wrote the book that really caught people's imagination. In his book, Steve said several things that were really inspiring and got people activated and sort of really brought the idea to the front. And Exodus 2, certainly in America, was one of the best-selling Christian books of the period. And as I say, it got a lot of attention. Steve believed that the Lord had shown him various routes, particularly through Europe, and he wrote about these in detail. He also encouraged people to get ready for this as it happened, which was not a bad thing at all. But he also said one or two other things, such as that technology shouldn't be used to assist Aliyah, and many other things that really didn't come to pass. The routes that he outlined didn't come to pass. And many people started to prepare for this second exodus by buying properties. I know a man in America bought a load of cars, took the engines and stripped them down, got scientists to work on developing non-electric versions of starting them in case of a nuclear blast. People stored food that rotted away years ago. All kinds of things. Millions and millions of pounds were spent on people preparing for this. So I'm not decrying Steve because I knew him very well, and I actually did the Russian version of Exodus 2 for him. You can't really see that very well on the screen, but we did that, and it really was a good tool in encouraging Jewish people to get ready for Aliyah in the Soviet Union and in other places. Steve was a very inspiring speaker, and he raised a lot of traction for Aliyah, so his work wasn't wasted. I'm not decrying his roots. I just believe that Steve was doing his best. And Steve died last year, I think it was last year, in the Philippines. And, God rest his soul. I liked him a lot. And did quite some work with him. But where Christian-sponsored Aliyah really starts, were various prayer meetings. There were prayer meetings. I remember there was a big one in Scotland. You can read about that in Banner to the Nations. Pat Frame, our CEO, has written her experiences about in Scotland with some other people. And in England, there was some traction. Prayer for Israel certainly got hold of it. And the late Derek Prince spoke about it on several occasions at Westminster Central Hall, where the church that I was the pastor at the time led the worship. Derek and myself became very good friends, and I actually sat with him the day before he died at the late Eliyahu Ben Haim's residence in Jerusalem. So people like Derek Prince, Lance Lambert, people who are well known with a big heart for Israel, really started speaking about the possibility of this outside of Steve's own personal vision. In addition, everybody's late, aren't they? The late Shel Schuberg and Johannes Fascius, head of World Intercessors, head of International Fellowship of Intercessors, really got a grip on this. So 1984 is when I believe the Christian-sponsored Aliyah movement really began to happen. And this happened at a prayer meeting in Altensteig in Germany that was coordinated by Johannes Fascius and Shel Schuberg, along with Gustav Scheller, who was a facilitator of these meetings, who went on to found Operation Exodus. I had the privilege of working with Gustav in the very early years of that project. However, this meeting was convened and several international intercessors came to it. The Capitol Hill intercessors came. Most of the international, well, not most, but several of the international leaders of ministries came to, and it'd be a regular thing to pray for Aliyah. To pray for Aliyah. Not for Exodus, but to pray for Aliyah. Because we always believed that Aliyah would precede Exodus, and that something rather dreadful in the world situation would have to happen for the Jewish people to leave America, certainly, where at the time of these meetings, there were far more Jewish people lived in New York than actually lived in Israel. So this was the situation that we were in. It began to be a little more regularised and formalised in a sense, and one of the great men of God, who unfortunately was killed in a car crash in Ethiopia, a place that he loved and worked in for many years, Gerald Gotson, one of the best coordinators of people I ever knew in my life. So Gerald was there, Shel was there. Shel Schuberg, I believe, had a prophetic ministry, and I used to travel with him, and when he'd finished his speaking, I would do a teaching on the things that he'd spoken about at the International Prayer Conference in Jerusalem. And these meetings were starting to gather traction. And as we're going along, various people have got their own roles, prophetic roles, practical roles, I had the privilege of being sort of like the theological advisor, if you like, to the meetings. And we're all getting very, very, very excited. And plans were being made. Gustav Scheller had a vision for a ship. Several other people had vision for ships as time went by, which we'll come to as we go along. In the meantime, a man called Phil Hunter, who was living in Hull, who was an evangelist with a bus company, he had the revelation too. And apart from the Altensteig, he was getting ready for a busing project to help Jewish people leave. Very, very exciting times. And then something unbelievable happened. Many people have been meeting. There was a great movement called Refusenik. People were getting together to pray and stand up and saying, let my people go. They should have been said, let your people go, really. That God in his grace, I'm sure, understood that Gentiles could say that. Great meetings, Refusenik. Great group of people. But then, as I said, something entirely unexpected happened. Myself, my wife, and a team of us, we were in Poland, working on the project, led by this great lady, Sister Alice, who was building this big farm. In faith, the Jewish people would leave and pass through Poland on their way to their promised land. This building went on for several years, and the people who ran it, Gustav and Maria, remarkable people, and they used to pray where they could get things like cement from. Cement was easy to get in Poland, but it was all exported. Machine parts, it was an absolutely amazing project that did eventually raise its fruit. Well, we were on our way back, and we'd visited East Germany to help some Russian people that were in a secure compound, so to speak, when it actually happened. It happened. The guard post in Germany was deserted. And the rest, as they say, in 1989 was history. So what happened in between 1984 and 1989? 5 years of frenzied activity in prayer, but also in practical ways. Remarkable time in East Germany. We were there on a cultural exchange, myself, my wife, my youngest son, and our team. We had a good team that worked together. And we were visiting the Lutheran churches in East Germany. And to our surprise, we found that some of these pastors had got a heart for Israel. And it was so different from the Jewish people. It was so difficult, East Germany. The Stasi, the secret police, if you want, would have their eyes on everybody. It's thought that 80% of East German people informed on the neighbours. And a Lutheran pastor was a very hazardous pastime. When you graduated college, you were taken to the Stasi and given a good hiding and told you weren't allowed to evangelise. So one pastor would have maybe 5 or 6 churches with 3 or 4 people in each one. So we're in East Germany, and this was a real moment for the kingdom. 2 Russian soldiers, in rags virtually, knocked on the door begging for bread. We got speaking to them, and they said because they were Jewish, they were treated worse than the other ordinary Russian soldiers. They were regularly beaten, and they told us about this group of Russian Jewish people who tried to escape from the Soviet Union. They were in this compound in Magdeburg. So God says he looks after children and the foolish. So as the foolish, we went to visit these people, and the story is in Banner to the Nations. But in brief, there were about 40 or 50 of these people, all about to be deported back into Russia. So all they got was enough money to buy 1 sandwich a day from like a local sandwich shop, and that was it. They're in a terrible state. So we took it upon ourselves to go and visit the local Gauleiter, the governor of Saxony, as it was in those days. We went to see him, and God did something quite amazing. He sent his bodyguards out when we went to see him, asked us what we're there for, and we just told him. these Jewish people, we'd like to help them. You know, if you don't want them, Israel does. He sent his bodyguards out and said, I'm actually Jewish, I'm a secret Jewish man, I'll help you. And then that opened a complete channel to get Jewish people out from East Germany. Easily. Because when we were doing a movement to Tegel Airport, we were given a clear pass-through. Otherwise, we were brought behind the tank tracks, straight across the police boarding into Marylebone, the next one. God was gracious in those days. Christian Aliyah was happening. Then in 1989, as they say, the rest really, in fact, is history. So we're going to visit Ezra now, and when we come back, we'll talk about how Christian sponsor Aliyah started proper in a big way. Welcome back to our discussion, our talk, our memories of the history of Aliyah, sponsored by Christians. So, in 1989, there was a great scramble to see what could be done practically. Gustav Schaller had a meeting in Tel Aviv, shared his vision that first money would raise for the shipping programme. And as you know, the ships ran for a short amount of time before it was considered to be more practical to use aircraft. One of the big things, one of the more dynamic aspects, really came from what became Aliyah Highways. It was known by a different name initially to start with. And my dear friend and CEO, Pat Frame, really was the, what should we say, the power behind the machine that operated this rather large, widespread and very dynamic ministry. Mostly in Ukraine, eventually to Russia, Belarus, everywhere, so to speak, where teams went out to Jewish centres, shared the scriptures, and bused people to the airport. The Jewish agency were paying the fares. But it was quite an expensive operation. But through God's grace, there always seemed to be nearly enough money to do everything. Thousands of people, thousands were bused to airports to go to Eretz Israel. As time went by, things became a little bit more difficult. There was a massive surge in the early days. But as time went on, not so much facility was put in, but this movement of Aliyah persisted and went on. In the early 90s, Mel Hosel, who founded Ezra, had a great vision, and Mel's story, I'm sure, is well known, and there are plenty of online resources. You can hear Mel's story. I first met Mel when he was going around sort of the busing ministry and also Ebenezer and one or two others, because there were other people who made some attempts to start Somalian ministries, but none of them really were very successful. For instance, with the shipping project, Ulf Ekman from Word Life Ministries, and they did some quite wonderful things post 1989, shipping loads and loads, thousands, tens of thousands of New Testaments in Hebrew and Tanakh in Hebrew to distribute. And they sent these teams of young people out to plant churches with a ministry focusing on the Jewish people. I did question a little bit, I've got to say, part of the punchline, that if you bless Israel, if you bless Abraham, then you'll be blessed, which has slight shades of prosperity ministry. But they did spread the word, and they opened doors for ourselves and other people to visit their churches and to motivate their people to reach Jewish people and help with Aliyah. So, as well as assisting Aliyah in its practical way, helping people with documents, helping them onto the buses, making sure they got the airports, and various other initiatives such as this, it was a wonderful opportunity to teach the church and also to teach the Jewish people. The amount of times it's been said to Pat and myself and others that work there, thank you for introducing us to our God. Because you must always remember that in the former Soviet Union, Judaism was more or less proscribed. Synagogues were shut. The main synagogue in Kiev, for instance, became a puppet theatre of all things. A puppet theatre. The speaking of the Russian language was forbidden. There's a little joke, which actually, ironic as it is, there's a Jewish man sat in Gorky Park reading the scriptures aloud in Hebrew. Two of the police come up to him and say, "What do you think you're doing?" He said, "I'm reading the scriptures in Hebrew. So when I get to heaven, I'll know what the people are saying there." So the Russian said to him, "What if you go to hell?" He said, "Russian, I speak already." Ironic, but still rather amusing. So it was a wonderful opportunity to both introduce the Jewish people to their own scriptures. There'd been no real Jewish presence to help teach in the former Soviet Union until 1989, when Lubavitch made a massive inroads and opened various Jewish centres and synagogues, restored some of the old ones, and so on. Lubavitch aren't particularly keen on Aliyah. They don't disapprove of it. They don't particularly support it, because Rav Schneerson didn't do it himself. He was the last Lubavitch Rebbe, if you're not familiar. So this activity is taking place. And it needed a lot of effort to re-educate the church towards this. It was no use people like myself who, maybe I will share how I came to these things. If you just look at the broadcast on the beginnings and so on, my wife Maria speaks on there how she had a vision when we were both at Bible college. And also, I received it and thought it was great. The Lord showed me a picture of an old Russian train sort of pulling up in the snow and people getting off it and being taken to Israel. And I suppose these things are in your head anyway, but I mean, these things do confirm things for you in a rather big way. So, how did it all happen? Where do we get the volunteers from? Where should we get the money from? How did it work for Israel? Well, I want to tell you that when the first Christian Aliyah started, the Daya team, the religious Jews in particular, were very opposed to it, because they believed it was a pure piece of evangelism, trying to get Jewish people to change their minds, rather than simply help the Jewish people in their return to Israel to meet their Lord, their God, their Redeemer on the mountains of Israel, according to Ezekiel chapter 36. Please don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. Jewish people can be saved anywhere. But to share the gospel and invite somebody to change their religion when you're providing a service for them under Israeli law is the same as paying somebody to change their religion, and it's simply not allowed. But there is a great evangelism of silence and grace. If a Jewish people ask you about a Christian about the faith, you're quite free to share it. Quite free. By your fruits will they know you. Aliyah is the most wonderful thing that is thwarted in a lot of areas by supersessionism or replacement theology. Which is a bit ironic, because There's no theology about it. It's simply a misreading of text and then imaginations and ideas. I actually prefer the term displacement theology to replacement theology, because the church has effectively displaced the Jewish people, certainly not replaced them. To continue, part of the ministry of Ezra is not simply to move people from A to B, not simply to provide paperwork. It's also, not in the 3 hours, but it's a fourth one that I like to include myself, reconciliation. Reconciliation. As I said, the religious Jewish people were not keen on this at all in the first place. The Haredim particularly, they're the sort of ultra-orthodox, with the big hats and the payoffs and everything. Those that live there are nearly all on student visas in yeshivas, because they do not believe that Israel is legitimate until Messiah appears. But the Diet team was still very religious and everything, believed it was just pure evangelism, and they referred to it as Holocaust number 3. Holocaust number 1 being the Crusades, Holocaust 2 being Nazi Germany, and they believe that we are trying to kill the Jewish religion by Christianizing Jews on their way into Israel. This is not the case. So I just want to say a personal thank you to those that went before. I'm the only person still alive of the founding movement, and it's been my great honour and privilege to be so. It's also my great honour and privilege to work with Ezra, and there's a lot of work still to be done for the future. Anti-Semitism is worse than it's ever been since the Nazi Holocaust. We've seen the things in Colombia, New York, we've seen the things in Los Angeles, we've seen the things in Belgium and in Germany. Maybe we'll speak about these things next time. But in the meantime, please pray for the fulfillment of the prophetic scriptures of the Jewish people's return to Eretz Israel, and for your part in it. Yes, you and you. We can all pray, and we can all support, and we can all share. God be with you till we meet again.